I have an honest question to ask. Which team are we going to see from Tennessee and from Alabama for that matter? Because depending on when we're talking about in the season through the first half, Tennessee looks unstoppable offensively and Alabama looks unstoppable offensively. And depending on which Tennessee game we're watching, that defense looks like a juggernaut most of the time, right? The Alabama team, not so much. So if we're talking about what this is going to come down to, it's real easy to say this feels like a game that is going to come down to quarterback play. Feels like a game in which we're going to talk about Nico Iamaleava coming out of his funk. He has not thrown for more than 200 yards against any SEC opponent. He didn't look great against Oklahoma. He didn't look great against Florida. And frankly, he didn't look great against Arkansas. But I don't know how much of that has to do with Nico Iamaleava. I understand that people are getting wise to the kind of looks that they could give when they're really doing a great job of fooling him pre-snap and then going into a look post-snap that he's not necessarily ready for. I should say the play that they have on call is not ready for. So one of the things that is happening is defenses are showing them a light box at pre-snap. They're showing them 5 or 6 in the box, and then they either move a linebacker inside, a nickel inside crash, or they crash down safeties to try to stop the run because Dylan Sampson has been making it happen. Like, the offensive line is good, but he's really good. And you want to necessarily get to Nico, because if you can get him and you can get him off balance, force him to get off the spot, maybe you're going to have some success. Meanwhile, they got like an edge rusher at quarterback named Jalen Milroe who can also throw bombs. It feels like this is a game that Alabama can win more so now than it did a couple of weeks ago. Not just because Alabama had lost to Vanderbilt, but because the Tennessee offense just has not really looked spectacular, right? I think when we're talking about Bama, we're talking about a team that looks a lot like 2019 Oklahoma, meaning they can score on anybody at any time. But stopping people is not necessarily their forte. That said, Tennessee has not scored more than 25 points against an SEC opponent this year. And Alabama scored at least 27 in every game they have played. And they put 41 up on Georgia, and we all think that Georgia's pretty damn good. I think as we're looking at what they got on the outside with Jeremy Bernard, with Cole Adams, who, by the way, is from around the way at Owasso, Oklahoma, and what they could do with Jam Miller, who's game record. You got a game record tailback for Alabama. You got a game record tailback for Tennessee. You got stupid skill at quarterback, and you got a couple of wide receivers on both sides who can go. Ryan Williams being at the top of that list, right? And if you need to go get it, 4 to 2 equals 6. Like, that's what it is. Like, number 4 throwing the ball to number 2, there's a chance it's going to go for 6. Ryan Williams might be the best wide receiver that Alabama has produced since Jamison Williams, and certainly on par with what we've seen from Jamison Williams, what we've seen from Devontae Smith when he won the Heisman Trophy. He's a true freshman doing it like we've never seen somebody at 17 do it at Alabama that way. He also could finish like 3rd or even 4th in the Biletnikoff Award race, which is bonkers because Trey Harris has been nasty. Through the first 6 games of the season, we're talking about a guy who has 987 receiving yards, which is, again, nasty. Any other year, we're probably talking about Trey Harris as a Heisman Trophy candidate. But because we have Cam Ward doing what he does, Ashton Jeanty doing what he does, Travis Hunter doing what nobody's ever done before, it's real thick up there at the top, right? I think this game, though, could do a lot to force those conversations for Jalen Milroe, not so much for Nico Iamaleava. I just don't think the Heisman voters give a damn about what they see on a field as much as they do what the statistics are going to tell them. I think this is also the best Tennessee football team that Josh Heupel's ever had. And that's not shade. That's just what they've been building to. They are really good man for man up and down that roster. And they have, for the first time in quite a long time, the kind of team that I think is capable of beating anybody. And by anybody, I do mean anybody. I think they can play with anybody in college football right now. It's what team are we going to see? If we see the Bama team that I think we've seen in the past, the kind that can go up 28-0 on Georgia, that's a hard place for Tennessee to come back from, but they could do it, especially when you take into account what they got on that defensive line. Like, they have dudes that get after people. Are they soft on the back end? Yeah, but so is Georgia. So is Alabama. They're not really that great in the secondary this year. But you don't have to be that great in the secondary if you can get pressure with 4, right? If you can confuse Tennessee with running 3-3 fronts, not really knowing who to pick up and how, you might be able to simulate some pressures and you might be able to get home. I remember there's one play that Travis Williams had on call where they just couldn't get lined up quick enough. It's Tennessee was going tempo fast. They still sent the blitz and they were able to get home. You got to be able to pick that up if you are the Tennessee offensive line. I don't know what has to change on that because I'm not smart enough to tell you what I would change about the offensive line to change their rules to where you could pick up with whoever's coming from that defensive front. But I know this, Kane Womack has to be watching all the Arkansas film, all the Florida film, and all the Oklahoma film and trying to do something similar because it's working. Whatever it is that you have to say to your defense to get them to play at that level, you're going to do it. And if you make it into a low-scoring ball game, chances are you have an opportunity to run the ball out of touch for Tennessee. Like, this is a game where I think Jalen Milroe's arms and legs are going to make the difference like they did against South Carolina. Remember, in the final quarter of that game against South Carolina, he had a passing TD and a rushing TD, and that proved to be the difference. Is he going to throw you the ball? Probably. And that's really the Achilles heel when we're talking about Jalen Milroe. He has gotten so much better at throwing the intermediate routes. He's gotten so much better at choosing his spots when he is going to take off and run. He can still get flustered and try to force something over the middle that he shouldn't. He can still get flustered and try to throw a ball, hospital ball, for a guy that's going to get laid out. He can still do that. But he also is the kind of guy that makes it incredibly hard for a defensive coordinator to feel like he's got the right play call on, because there is a play that Jalen Milroe can make no matter what you have. If you got everybody else locked up, you still have to deal with him one-on-one. And that man has proven that basically since Katie Tompkins, you can't hold him one-on-one. He is going to either outmaneuver you or shuck you off. When you're that big and you're that fast, you got that kind of arm, there's nothing on a football field you can't do. He's also like benefiting from, I think, years and years of what this has developed from Alabama in the last decade. Like basically since Blake Sims, we've seen some iteration of a quarterback who can make it happen, whether it's throwing the ball down the field or with his legs. And every time they've had one of those at Bama, they've been able to be good. Kalen DeBoer is really good at putting Jalen Milroe in positions where he can win and succeed. I think that's one of the reasons we've seen such a big leap in his play this year from last year. Kalen DeBoer has been really good about identifying what Jalen Milroe does well and calling plays that really bolster that. I love watching Jalen play football. I love watching Nico play football. I'm excited every time we get to the third weekend in October because I know this game is meaningful, but also because this game is now back to being a real rivalry. Remember, for about 16 years in there, we're not talking about this game as a rivalry. We're talking about this game as one that Tennessee is going to mess up and Bama's just going to walk away with. That's not true anymore. Now this game has real stakes because both of these teams are in the college football playoff conversation right now. With a second loss, it makes it really difficult for you to stay there. With a win, you get to continue. Like, imagine if LSU takes a loss this weekend, A&M takes a loss this weekend, and then Texas takes a loss this weekend. You're right there as the winner of this ball game, being in the SEC championship game. I know there's a lot of football left to play here, and I know Tennessee still got to play Georgia, but Alabama still got to play LSU. This game is what I expected when we talked about a 12-team playoff, when we talked about how many teams could get in. We're going to be looking at these sorts of games like we look at Ole Miss and LSU last week, and we're going to make some judgment calls. We're going to say this team is better based on what we saw. We're going to say that offensive line or that skill player matters, like we did with Florida State last year with Jordan Travis. And I think that's going to become the norm. So you're going to have to show out in games like this one. I'm so excited. I just want to know which version of Alabama and Tennessee we are going to see in this heated rivalry.